Thanks. I wonder if we could bring the rest of our panel back onto the screen, please, as we kind of move out into a slightly wider discussion. And I think just me making a few notes, I'd be really interested in responses, really, having heard about the CANON project, and particularly the database aspect of it from our panelists, in terms of you know, where's the value of this? How does this help from your individual perspectives? How might this connect with what you're doing? Jim?
I think using it would make one feel part of something larger, which has got to be a good thing. I would imagine it would take quite a lot of discipline and driving to do it, but given an understanding of the structure, and one of the team, and I think of possibly someone in my team who could handle that. I'd find it difficult, but I think there are people, hopefully you put it at a level where in most smallish teams there would be someone who could keep it up to date. That's the key, isn't it? Keeping it up to date and putting things in a way that other people can understand them and reference them.
Yeah, I must say it's that if you start from scratch, it's difficult to put stuff in, but mostly we start from an existing list that we put in, and that then is enriched, and that makes it way easier, because then you don't have to think where is it in the structure and so on. You just go to an item and you just add information, and that is rather easy to do.
And that gets you more familiar with the structure as well.
Yeah,
because to do that you're navigating. Yeah,
and also I think it's to kind of underline the, you know, the sort of philosophy behind a crowdsourced thing is the energy and the focus goes in places where people have an interest in doing it. You know, if people are particularly interested in, you know, particularly the products of a particular manufacturer or something, they'll sit down and do the work on that bit. And if there are other areas that nobody's interested in, then well, it won't get done, but that's kind of fine because nobody's interested. And also I think really important to underline that you know, it's better to do something than nothing, you know. So even if it's just oh well, I've got a list of, you know, of a manufacturer's products with a first manufactured date but no details, well, let's get that in there, and somebody else will come along later and go, oh well, I've got a description of it, or I've got the page of the catalogue that it was in with some technical specifications, so I can add that. So I think it is that kind of sense of, you know, just get started, get something done, and then it'll grow from there.
And realize it's never finished. Yeah.
And I think it's valuable as well that it's from in the beginning. So as you said, Nick, it's a beginning. It's better to do this than nothing. But I think from the beginning it has the potential to be to have a broad range, because it's very difficult to have like this structured way to inventory all your different objects, and this really gives a good guide to structure your information in doable parts.
Great.
Yeah.
Stefan, anything from you?
Yeah, I already wrote something in the chat. I have some hope that this project might be a good foundation to start something new and to start really fundamental research and continuous research, and not only in these special projects where you get some money for 2 years or something, and then you don't know how it will go on. But what is really necessary for all of us is that there is continuous research, and so that, as I also said, official museums or so are getting interested in building a collection. If there is no research at all, even these as the example I said, where the technical museum asked us as an independent non-profit society to take stuff because they do not really know what to do with it, because there is no research about it. And maybe there is a person who is interested in, a special person, but this is also what you said, Chris. There's so many stuff in your head, but it's not written down. And it's the same with this woman from the Berlin City Museum. Of course, there's much more in her head than she ever is able to write down. And if this person is gone, this is not only a person who's gone, and there could be a new one. This is nearly impossible because she takes all this knowledge with her. And if there is no continuity somewhere, and if the universities don't establish continuous research in this field, in this technical field, yeah, nothing will really happen. And hopefully you build the foundation to build a structure of how can I go into this field, how can I manage all this? This is tremendous work and very difficult, but if you build the start, maybe others will follow and develop more stuff. This is my hope with this project.
Yeah. What my hope is that people don't have to start from scratch again, thinking about in what structure do I put my information, but they can focus on the information.
Yeah, and that you can find information more easily, and that researchers realize, oh, there is something. I don't start by nothing, but there is something where I can relate to, and which makes my work easier and even possible. If you don't have the idea that there is some information, something, and you have to look for it everywhere, maybe a lot of people say, oh no, this seems to be too complicated and too much work for me. But if you have this foundation, and there are so many universities of Europe involved in this project, and hopefully these universities start also their own projects and establish something and continue this work. And yeah.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask, will this system be in a position to be accessed or adopted by other organizations in the near future, or how does that timeline work?
Well, at the moment, the project ends the 1st of January. So till then, we're very busy with doing what we promised and make all the final results and so on. But once that is done, I would be very happy to open it up to other organizations and maybe do some training and do some starting on how do we do this. So I think in that sense, I think from 1st of January on, well, probably a week later, because we need some time to recover. But the idea is that information you have could all be there and could be shared and could be. So that's absolutely that's the intention. The intention is not to keep it for us. We needed to do that to be able to develop it fast enough, but it's absolutely possible to do so.
Right.
But then I have to come over and have lunch in a very good pub in your neighborhood.
I think you can nominate the pub under those conditions, surely. And the menu. Be very welcome. What on the larger scheme of things, I'm still getting my head around the CANON project. There's one member in the UK, and I think I'm looking at him now.
That's me, yes.
How does this work? How does the club get extended, and to what sort of other organizations? I know there are several schools in there, and part of what you're going to do is education.
Yeah, so most of the organizations within the CANON project are kind of specialist schools or departments within universities focused on kind of vocational theatre, technical or design or architecture training at degree level, and then there's also the Prague Quadrennials involved in the project as well. So as Chris indicated just now, our focus, I mean, in a sense, obviously throughout the project, but particularly at the moment as we're in the closing months, is to deliver the deliverables that we told Erasmus Plus that we were going to do when they gave us, quite a substantial amount of money to pay for staff time, to pay for travel, to pay, including students. Students have been involved in the project as well as academics. So in terms of that kind of sense of expanding it beyond, a kind of quite clearly defined project and who was going to be doing it, that feels like the kind of phase 2 of the project potentially. And I know within the project, and Chris might want to say some more in a moment about, what would Canon 2 look like, what it would consist of, who would be involved, how would we fund it, so on and so forth. I don't know, Chris, whether you've got anything you want to share about that at this stage.
Well, it's still in the making, and I think there is 2 pathways. On one hand, an educational pathway where we continue doing stuff with students. On the other hand, I can also imagine that we identify a series of collections, for example, that want to work together, and where we, for example, work on a standard for digitalization. How standard for documenting more in detail, that type of stuff, and where we, by experiment on their collections, kind of make an international standard. That could be one thing, which could include, for example, in getting this taxonomy into museums and that type of stuff. So it's a bit, the problem with the project as we had it now is that it was 2 projects in one, which was pretty heavy, to be honest, I think. So it could be 2 different projects. And if you do the project on documenting and that type of stuff, it's quite possible we have other partners that are, I think on Perspective, I think on Oystat, that could be part of it. So we, at the same time, we create awareness under their umbrella. At the same time, we have the opportunity to do what we always want to do in documenting everything we have. And at the same time, we create a network that is working better together. So that's one part. On the other hand, it would be great to extend the education part and see how, because there is a lot of schools where history is not really taught, or is, I'm going to be very rude to some colleagues now, but more taught based on myths than on research. I think there is still a lot of work to do there also. I'm a bit in doubt if the 2 projects should be together in one box, or it should be 2 different projects. That's,
yeah, I think for me, Chris, the connecting point really, isn't there, is if in terms of collections, and then the Canon base as a kind of index or a way of accessing or understanding what's out there. One of the functions of that, of course, will be to support education. That's the point of contact. But you're right, they are, we folded those 2 things together in the current project, but they are really separate things, and probably ought to progress separately but connectedly, if that makes sense. I'm wondering about returning perhaps to some of our themes earlier on this morning in the context of what we've just been discussing and the CANON project. And particularly I've been thinking, as people have been talking about, the role of private and small collections, and sometimes not so small collections, but those in private hands. The model that Jim indicated that he'd done with White Light, which is a kind of one of the big lighting hire companies, well, more than lighting hire, lighting sound companies in London. Also does a lot of production services, has really moved into digital technologies and virtual reality production and that kind of thing as well. So they're quite, by our industry standard, quite a big organization. And they've rather wonderfully provided a home for some of Jim's collection within their warehouse. And it's fantastic if you get a chance to see it in Southwest London. Because it's on the mezzanine floor and you're literally overlooking this huge warehouse with lots of equipment going in and out and being prepped to go out on productions and things, and then you're sat there with this kind of, you know, particularly lighting control equipment from the you know, sort of 1920s, 1940s, 1960s. So that there's the real sense of connection into the industry, and I think that feels, and in a different but in some ways very similar way, Peter, what you've done, that sense of it being, this is something that grows out of the industry and is hosted by the industry, whether that is a model that could be extended further and further opportunities to deal with this issue of the precariousness of private collections, by just getting the industry to do a bit more for us in a way that doesn't cost them too much, because you know, everybody's under pressure, and at the end of the day, commercial companies are run as commercial companies. They're not charities and they're not education institutes. But I don't know, any thoughts about that?
I think the reason that the White Light connection worked was because there were two people at the top, the one at the very top, Brian Raven, and then Chris Nichols, one of the other directors, decided it could work and there would be room in this weird little bit that was partly a canteen and a rest area, and it involved stairs and things that were awkward, but it was just enough space to do this. It's a very noisy place in which to teach, it must be said, because people are doing unspeakable things the other end of the warehouse. Heavy pieces of metal, but if you go to the inner sanctum, which was Chris's office, but again that's open plan and up another set of stairs, there's the other bit that's really brought the value added, which is the Strand and other memory boards. And when I ever taught in there, I tried to make certain there was at least one or two Strandies in there with me, so that at about possibly 1968 I could hand over control to them and just be askance at the lack of faders from that point of view, and amazing what things did later. So there's also a very big resource there if anyone wants to look up plans of the architecture of lighting boards. There's a lot of that in there as well. Just thinking about who else could do this further north, further north or in other parts of our country. Northern Light would sort of be a natural, in that Lord Primrose, no relation, was a guy who had a lot of history interest, and he was the traditional owner of it. I'm not sure that Stage Electrics hasn't bought it now. And there must be somewhere around about the Yorkshire, Lancashire powerhouse, it's called. There must be someone in there. But it also depends not only on the high-ups giving it room and airing, but on one or two technicians who are allowed to understand it and to be the ones that are called on, and their foreman recognise this is so. If there's a teaching session and those pesky lights need to be got out of store, because the pesky lights are in a way the most hard, the high maintenance ones, because they have to be wheeled out probably down a passage into a conference room and set up in a certain way, and then you can show the story. But they're normally stored somewhere, I don't know, a very large cupboard, I would think, on a meat rack if you're lucky. And probably not, because they need meat racks for the other things.
Yeah. So it feels like there's a stage in a process here which is about identifying, you know, who are those champions who are out there who might be, you know, who maybe don't know that they're those people, as it were, or don't know that there's a role that they could play in this.
I think part of this
did understand that.
Yeah, but I think part of this comes from where another reason it succeeded in white light was that the Backstage Heritage collection at that point was a visible entity. We'd just been to Plaza and launched it. Since then, it's been the epitome of a busy thing with no center. Because there is no, if you look at it, you say, okay, who's the chair of this? Who is the committee of this? Where's the funding of this? None of it. There's none of it. We rely on the kindness of strangers and the initiative of a few. And that would make it harder this time for anyone to make an approach to someone to say, well, actually, who are you representing? Well, I'm representing a very energetic bubble.
Yeah. Yeah, so that sense of having some kind of structure.
Yeah, I think this is a very early 21st century thing, that up to now, anything that's got going has had meetings in London. People have gone up there at done inconvenient times and made it happen, worked out a constitution and done all that. This hasn't had that. It had one meeting in a restaurant near to us, and then a proper meeting in our back garden, and that, as far as I know, is it. 8 years ago.
Right.
David wants to say something.
Sorry?
David wants to say something, I think.
Yes, so let's bring in
Hi.
So we have two Davies who might want to say something, but David Wilmer.
Can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Really fascinating to listen today. I just thought it might be useful because we've been working, Theatre Search, my company's been working on a new initiative which is just starting to roll out, which is kind of pertinent to what we've been talking and hearing about this morning. Some of you know that I've been associated on and off with the Tyne Theatre and Opera House in Newcastle in the north of England for many years. And we undertook a research master plan architectural planning project, and we've defined a new project for the theatre, which is an 1867 opera house with original 19th century stage machinery. And you know, Jim and I have both had the pain of the last 40 years of organizations that, you know, have hoped and done an awful lot of talking. And I can honestly tell you all that if I'd saved all my train fares to London over the last 40 years, I could have funded the whole bloody museum myself. And, you know, I mean, and so there comes a point in life when you kind of just have to kind of grasp the nettle. And we saw an opportunity to do this in Newcastle finally, quite recently. And as a result of that, we've put together a project which isn't just about stage technology, it's about theatre. You know, people talked about doing it in a theatre rather than in a warehouse. And I think that is central to my personal philosophy of how we need to approach this. And the board at the theatre are very now receptive to that as an idea. And to cut a long story short, we've discovered an extraordinary collection of 19th century theatre music composed specifically some for this theatre. We've put that together with 3 universities in the northeast of England as a proposal, and we're 3 weeks into a year project now, which includes the completion of the restoration of the stage machinery, which I started back in 1986 after the disastrous fire at the theatre, but was never completed. And we've now actually brought master carpenter and staff in to start to develop that. So what we're doing is we're working with, I can't tell you the full detail because it hasn't been publicly announced, but we're actually working with an internationally renowned conductor to pull the musical elements of it together, to pull the stage mechanics of it together, and to start to explore the idea of stagecraft in the 19th century in the widest possible manner. And really my definition of stagecraft is the same as the conductors, which is, quote, absolutely no microphones anywhere in the building, end of quote, working in an acoustic environment, which is the central philosophy of what we're doing. But we're also wanting to restore a lost, in inverted commas, theatre, second space at the time theatre. And this is what the project's about as well, which could be an experimental space where we can do, not in a 1200 seater, but in a 350 seater, community and technology experimental work with, dare I even say it, even thinking about gaslighting, as well as early electrics, in a modest space, which from a cost point of view, on a day-to-day basis, becomes much more tenable than trying to do it and take over a 1200 seater. It's not tenable. So whilst it's very, very early days, I am extremely excited by it for all these reasons, in that we're trying to put like the idea of performance and stagecraft in the bigger context within a theatre that has a lot of historic machinery. And not really a commercial plug, Nick, but I hope you'll allow me to say just that we hope we can welcome many of you that are listening and engaging today to Newcastle on the 13th to the 15th of September next year, when we'll be having a conference on stage machinery technology, but also this context of stagecraft in performance, to discuss many of the issues that have been alluded to today. And by that time, we're hopeful that we won't be finished, but we'll be a lot further down the road, and able to show people and talk about all these ideas that people have articulated today. And gosh, get together again. It's been long time since I've met some of you guys because of the world and its strange happenings. So there we are. Just, you know, really exciting to hear what you guys are up to. And also, some of you might have seen, I recently did an article in Sightline, the ABTT magazine, on the removal of the Drury Lane machinery. And we're currently looking for a new home for that. If anybody wants a copy of the article, or Nick, if I can send you a PDF, maybe I could circulate it to anybody who's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And similarly, I think we can, I saw the call for your conference. It looks really exciting next year. I think we can make sure that we flag that up to
super. Yeah, well, I'll send you all the details, and hopefully maybe we can, all of us can keep touch together, because I think we could organize, if everybody was up for it, we could have a separate seminar on this specific topic, and by which time Chris's canon will be very mature, and it'll be a great time maybe to talk more.
Brilliant, thank you, David. Yeah, that's terrific. Did anybody on the panel want to come back on anything that David's just said? No.
There's one small thing is that, of course, it's the best solution is to have it in a theater building, in a living environment where people pass by. But then you still have the issue is that on average you would show 10% of what you have, and that still leads to the problem is what do you do then with this other part? How do you house that? How do you support that? That's a bit still confusing for me. Is somebody should, well, I'm sometimes thinking, I know that DNA used to have what they call deep storage, where you can, things that are documented already, that are packed, put somewhere in a cheap and safe place, so you don't have too much costs, but at the same time you can retrieve it if you really need it. That could be one part of a solution also, I think, that you have next to where you can exhibit and show things, that you have a place where you bring stuff together. At least it's because that's a bit the, well, if I start from my orphanage idea, my first thing is like to keep it, and then the next steps will come when we have time. Problem is we never have time.
Great, thanks, Chris. Just a question that's coming from David Burtonshaw, just asking about connecting what we're doing with Theatre Crafts and John Primrose's work. And I think we had hoped that John would be joining us this morning. I think he did actually register for this morning, but obviously hasn't. I'm sure pressure of work or whatever meant he hasn't actually joined the forum today. But I think certainly it's something we'd be keen to have happen, isn't it? I think because obviously there's a terrific resource there, and it'd be great to get the two things just linked together, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going back to some of this kind of big picture stuff about how we move forward. One question I had is there a role for providing support to people who are in the position of having to dispose of collections? And I'm thinking of those, people who either get to the point where they can no longer, sustain a private collection, or they die, and the people, their children or whoever is left with that stuff and has to deal with it. At least providing a kind of central point where advice and guidance can be had, and maybe contacts can be made that might.
In fact, if you do that, you're too late. In the sense that is because the knowledge is gone at one moment, and ideally you would make people aware of that this will happen in one day in the future. That's one thing. And secondly, and I think that's what works pretty well in Belgium with Semper for the more general theatre heritage, is that they support people in making a collection ready for a handover, in the sense that it is documented, it's a ready package that can be taken over by somebody else. While to say it roughly, most collections, if you would look at it from an outsider, it's crap, because it's not documented. You have no clue what it is. You don't know, maybe what equipment it is, but you don't know the history of this specific part. Where did it come from? Who used it? And often it's that type of things that also make it a more interesting object. In the way, for an outsider, a spotlight is a spotlight. But if this spotlight is used in this specific theater with this person, then or it's a prototype or whatever, if you have the story behind it, it becomes way more interesting to get it into a collection. So I think ideally is supporting people before this point where they have to say goodbye to their collection, but supporting them earlier would in the long run be a way more efficient way of dealing with it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And there's a comment from Jane. Jane, I wonder if we could bring you in just to talk a little bit more about the work the ABTT is doing on this.
Is that it? Hello?
Hi, Jane. Thanks. Yes.
Right. Excuse me. Wow. What my last comment was about, nobody's mentioned the Association of Performing Arts Collections, which I've been linked to via the ABTT because I'm one of the sort of members. So I've learned a lot from them. I've also learned a lot about collection management from other work I've done. And I'm sort of in that area. So with the ABTT History Committee, we often get approached by people. I've got a garage full of books or photographs, and we have worked with, originally, when I took me on 20 years ago, they had big ideas about running their own archive. But again, money, space and everything, it came back to, I actually just ran their business archive, which is basically what they produce as opposed to what other people produce. So we then started helping people find an archive in this country that might be interested in having their stuff. And APAC, of course, are a very good group for that. So that's what we were doing. But yes, the provenance, very, very important.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And I think, again, this shows the value of this, both of this forum, but also more widely of us getting better at knowing what other people are doing, really, because I think this is the kind of really useful information that there are people to talk to who've got expertise or connections or whatever. And it is indeed one of the outputs of the CANON project, is to kind of help build this kind of network. So great to hear about this stuff that's already in place.
What I see is, from my experience with my society, is that it's always difficult to find a collection who would like to take this or that. As I said before, this figurine collection of this former costume director of the Deutsche Oper Berlin, she herself was talking for years to the Berlin City Museum that she has this tremendous collection, and if they would be interested, and it's only paperworks, it's nothing in 3D or something, and they always refuse because this only woman said it's too much work. And then finally we get some interest from the art library in Berlin, who finally said, oh, maybe we can take some of the sheets. And we said, oh yeah, wonderful, come over and have a look. But then suddenly this woman went ill, she got dementia, her family put her in a nursery home, and the family is quite difficult, and nothing happens. And what I talked about Max Keller, who contacted me or our society and said, okay, I'm now going. Now he's already 75, but he said, I have no children or something, and I want to take care of my collection, of my belongings. So he has tons of slides and books and this and that. And can you help me what to do with it before I die? And it's absolutely difficult. And I have a big problem to find somebody who says, yeah, I will take it, because the normal theater departments can't deal with it. It's too technical. Only the Munich Museum says, yeah, he has to come to Munich because he got famous in Munich, but he himself said, no, I don't want to go to Munich. I want to leave my stuff to Berlin, because this was the place where I started, even if I wasn't getting famous. And of course, I talked to the BHT as the only place in the whole German language area where you can study theater technology. And we finally got some kind of agreement that they will take the library, but they don't have any money to deal with the slides or to digitize them or something. And then I tried to interest companies, and especially the 4 companies who owe Max Keller a lot of research and developing new kinds of light, and ask them for some money to pay a student or something. And maybe I was asking for too less money. Maybe I had to put some more zeros at the end or something. I didn't get even 2,500 euros from them. It was absolutely strange. And we're still in discussion. Next week we have another meeting and try to figure out what to do next. And so this idea of an traveling exhibition emerged. And of course we can do, we can make plans about it and little design, but at the end we of course need money to realize this. and yeah, don't know what will happen, but it's extremely difficult, especially if you have these technical stuff, to find somebody who would take it. And this hopefully will change after your work, Chris, and many others who will follow to make it more institutional.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan.
One question: imagine that everything was scanned in advance, was documented in advance, and it was kind of a finished thing. I guess then it would be easier for a collection to take it, because they almost literally can take it and put it in a box. And
at the end, I started to digitize some slides. We started with the original slides for his famous book, and it's not it was okay to do it on my own. Again, some work without getting paid for it, and but you saw also these visualizations I started, because it's sometimes very sad work to digitize these old slides. It's then you realize how much better digital pictures are nowadays, and that you can't get so much out of it anymore, even with Photoshop and all this stuff. It's quite hard, and probably you don't have to digitize all of his slides, because I don't know how many slides he has, thousands of them. But luckily, he all took them by himself, so there are no rights from photographers. The rights are belonging to himself. And yeah, but at the end, then somebody like me is doing unpaid work in advance, that these official collections start to think about taking it. Yeah, with the Brand collection, they get some money to do some piece by piece digitization. Yeah? And it's always a good project for young researchers for getting a job for half a year or so, and doing not only digitization, but the research. What have I? What is this? And what do I see? This was also the problem with Brand collection. There was no inventory or something. There was no list. What is this piece of paper? What do I see? And so this so is such a lot of work. Yeah, but nobody cares about a person like Max Keller. They all know him and they all adore him, but they don't want the work.
Stefan, thank you for that kind of insight into that challenge. I'm sorry, Jim, I think we are over our time now, and I know certainly our technical team, and I'm sure many other people on this call, have other things that they need to be moving on to, unfortunately. I know we could keep this conversation going on for some time, and I'm sure we will need to meet again, I think, because I think we've started something that's really begun to open up where, you know, what the issues are, what the challenges are, but also maybe a little bit of a sense of where the opportunities are to move forward in a positive way. So I'm going to close it down here. Thank you, everyone. Chris, do you want to have the last word as the leader of the CANON project?
Oh, well, I can only thank you for the interest, and I can only express the hope that we find a way in cooperating together, because I think cooperation is the key word here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone who's attended, and thank you again to our panelists for their contributions and for really framing our discussions this morning. So particularly big thank you to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Goodbye.